to celebrate what they described as an Iranian victory in the war. Crowds chanted slogans in support of the axis of resistance, an alliance that includes Iran and allied groups across the region. A charity co-founded by Prince Harry in honor of his late mother, Princess Diana, is suing the British royal for libel. Harry co-founded Centerville in 2006 but resigned as a patron in last year after a falling out with its chair of the board. Global markets ended the week mixed as investors tracked U.S.-Iran peace talks and signs of easing tensions in West Asia. Oil prices slipped but remain elevated after recent supply disruptions, while inflation concerns persist following an energy-driven price surge. And it's day 4 of the fragile truce in West Asia. American and Iranian officials are set to meet in Pakistan for peace talks. But key sticking points like Lebanon and Hormuz remain a thorn in the side. Now here's some top developments that we bring for you at this hour. The Iranian delegation, led by Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, arrived in Islamabad. Iranian state media reported that the delegation includes senior political, military, and economic officials, including Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, Defense Council Secretary, Central Bank Governor, and several members of the parliament. The delegation was received at Nur Khan Air Base in Rawalpindi by Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Murid and Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar. The Iranian delegation flew for the peace talks aboard a flight named after the Iranian girls' school that was struck on the first day of the war. Flight Minab 168 honors the 168 people, mostly children, in an alleged U.S. strikes at a girls' elementary school in Minab. The delegation carried with them the shoes and bags of some of the students. Pakistan's Prime Minister says peace talks between the U.S. and Iran in Islamabad will be a make-or-break moment for a resolution to the war. In a televised national address, Shehbaz Sharif said representatives from both the countries would be in Islamabad to start the talks. Now, social media video posted show Israeli airstrikes in the city of Nabatea in southern Lebanon. Lebanon State and Security Agency has said that one Israeli strike killed 13 of its personnel. Lebanon's health ministry said the death toll from Israeli strikes across the country on Wednesday has now risen to 357. Israel has agreed to start formal peace talks with Lebanese representatives in Washington next week, but says they will not discuss a ceasefire with Hezbollah. A call reportedly took place today between the Lebanese and Israeli ambassadors in the U.S. The discussions planned on Tuesday and mediated by Washington are said to be centered around a ceasefire in Israel-Lebanon conflict. U.S. President Donald Trump says the U.S. will have the Strait of Hormuz open fairly soon. Trump also suggested that other countries are offering help, but he did not identify any nation. hour to discuss more. We're now being joined live by Colonel David B. Desorches from California. He's a professor of the Air Marshal Institute and former deputy director for peacekeeping in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Always a pleasure having you on our broadcast, Colonel. Let me begin by, of course, the sticking points and that has been surrounding these talks. First, how positive are you for these talks to be taking place in a very fragile ceasefire at the moment?
Not very. I think we'll have what diplomats call a frank exchange of views. The positions going in of the two sides are incompatible. They're not really negotiating positions. They're competing visions of how the other side will capitulate. I think there's also just some practical issues. The most recent reports are that Iran did not chart where its naval mines are, or just put out free-floating naval mines, which means in the Strait of Hormuz, which means that even if Iran agrees to remove them, they don't know where they are. So, which is of course a war crime. But so the possibilities of each side getting what they want seems to be remote. The linking of Lebanese Hezbollah to Iran's demands kind of puts the lie to 40 years of Iranian statements saying that this was simply a domestic Lebanese phenomena that they just supported as an issue of solidarity. Basically shows them to be an annex of Iranian foreign policy. So there's a lot of difficult issues here, and I don't think they'll be resolved at any time soon.
And at the same time, there are calls coming in. Of course, the remark came in from Donald Trump, who said, we will get the Strait of Hormuz, it'll open up soon. And earlier we had heard many comments coming in. He called it a beautiful thing and a joint venture. Is that a possibility we're looking for? Because it seems like Donald Trump has now realized how much of an economic backlog it has happened due to this shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz. Do you think there is a certain urgency to get it open as soon as possible?
There certainly is an urgency, but I'm not sure if there's the means there. I mean, the problem with the Strait of Hormuz is it's not strictly speaking a military problem. It's an insurance problem among insurance underwriters. And the people being targeted are not navies. They're civilian shippers of many of neutral states that have nothing to do with this. Again, indiscriminately targeted by floating of naval mines and by direct attacks from the Iranian forces. So in order for the insurance market to recover confidence that these civilian ships will not be attacked or struck, the mines have to be removed. And Iran has to publicly announce that they will not attack any more ships. And they have to do it in a manner that convinces these insurance underwriters. That's a significant climb down. So I'm not sure if there's enough coercion or goodwill to force them to make that kind of a public climb down. There are other issues on the U.S. agenda, the removal and the renouncing of enrichment of uranium. Again, that would be a significant climb down. And then Iran, of course, has said, well, all U.S. forces have to leave the region. I can tell you right now, the partner nations that host the U.S., they want more U.S. forces in the region because they've been attacked ruthlessly by Iran for weeks now, and mostly against their civilian infrastructure. So it's hard to see how negotiations are going to lead to a comprehensive peace here.
And who do you think has the ball in their hands? Because consider the fact that if you look at the talks that were happening before this war took place, somehow now it seems like Iran has a lot of leverage. Also, with the Strait of Hormuz becoming the #1 flashpoint and a very positive point for them to negotiate on, who has the ball in the hands right now?
Right. So let me start by looking at the negotiations before that. Those were very unproductive because Iran limited them just to the nuclear issue, which is only one of many issues. And, you know, the Arab states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, they're not unhappy because they've been nuked. They're unhappy because they've been attacked under sustained thing from ballistic missiles, which Iran refused to discuss before the war. We haven't seen, because Iran has closed its access to the international press and shut down the internet for months. We haven't seen what the damage is. It is quite possible that Iran is negotiating out of desperation, that they were approaching the point beyond which the state could not function because of damage. But at least in the public realm, the closure of shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, which we have to emphasize is a international water, and the shipping lanes that have been mined are in Omani territorial waters. And Oman was the mediator. So, they're not a combatant. But that certainly has grasped it. I think that Iran thinks it has leverage because they know that President Trump has midterm elections coming up. And if the price of gasoline remains very high, the price of gasoline was about $3.95 a gallon before the war here in California. And I just paid $5.66 a gallon. If that remains that high, President Trump's chances in the midterm election are going to be diminished significantly. So I think they feel they have momentum, but the air presence that's been hammering Iran that we haven't really seen reported, they are rearming, refitting, and they're in a position where if the conflict ensues, they'll probably have an expanded target list. So I would kind of put that question off to the side, hope for good things, and if the talks break down, we'll see who has momentum, we'll see who has initiative.
Also, one other point that Iran has raised and has put in agreement is, of course, ceasefire in Lebanon, which Israel has completely denied. They have talked about having talks with Lebanon in the U.S. itself, but they have not agreed for a ceasefire. Would Iran take that as a point of agreement, and will Israel at any point agree to a ceasefire if the U.S. actually agrees for agreement and puts in this point as well that there has to be a ceasefire in Lebanon?
I think it's highly unlikely the U.S. would put in the requirement for a ceasefire. I mean, what that would require would basically be the United States admitting publicly. Well, first off, there's been a lot of interesting admissions. For 40 years, Iran has said that Hezbollah is an independent movement that they just are bound to by affinity. When Hezbollah was ordered to attack Israel, which provided the pretext for Israel to intervene against it, which Israel wanted to do, that put the lie to it. And now we see that Iran is linking Hezbollah to an Iranian war. So it's clear now that they're just an arm of the Lebanese state, or I'm sorry, of the Iranian security infrastructure. But Lebanon is a sovereign nation, and a group within Lebanon that operates contrary to the wishes of the Lebanese state. It'd be like the United States making an agreement with the Naxalites on behalf of the Naxalites without involving the Indian government. It's unacceptable to any sovereign state. So I don't see that happening, and I don't see Israel doing this because I think Netanyahu realizes that American support for Israel is never going to be as high as it is right now. He's got a narrow window to destroy Hezbollah, and he's not going to casually give up that opportunity. So those issues are not there. There will be Lebanese-Israeli discussions, but those will not include Hezbollah. So I think Hezbollah, having obeyed Iran's orders, is unfortunately going to find that Iran is not in a position to support it, and is going to be dealt with by the Israelis on Israel's timeline.
And that's very interesting because when we talk about the talks that might happen between Israel, of course, Israel and Lebanon, one of the conditions that Israel has been talking about is disarmament of Hezbollah. So will that be one issue that will be raised at this point, and that will be conditioned for a ceasefire?
Possibly, but again, Hezbollah is not part of the talks between Israel and Lebanon. And Hezbollah does not serve the interests of the Lebanese state and does not serve the interests of the Lebanese people. Hezbollah serves the interests of Hezbollah's leadership, and it serves the interests of Iran. And that's why that's why it attacked Israel, because Iran ordered it to try to divert Israeli military resources away from attacking Iran. Even if Israel and Lebanon come to an agreement, the Lebanese state has not shown any real interest or capacity to forcibly disarm Hezbollah. It's clear that Hezbollah will not disarm unless it is forced to. So that leaves the only person with the interest and the capability to deal with Lebanon comprehensively is Israel. I think what Israel is challenged to do is to try to convince the Lebanese that their beef is with Hezbollah and not with the Lebanese state. Hezbollah always has portrayed any attack on it as an attack on Lebanese sovereignty, which is a considerable amount of gall when you consider how Hezbollah has basically become a de facto state within a state and has its own foreign policy.
Coming back to the Strait of Hormuz, do you think that these talks could somehow also balance the control that Iran has on the Strait of Hormuz in the future? When we look at the talks, would U.S. try and assess how much control does Iran have, considering the fact that it clearly disrupted the global economy with its stoppage?
Yeah, that's kind of hard to measure. I mean, one of the interesting questions here is China has been very quiet because they see the United States punching itself out. But China and your country suffer greatly from Iran's extortion, really, in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, these are international shipping lanes, and Iran is picking and choosing who can go, creating an energy crisis, and demanding payments for the passage of ships through international waters. That does not serve Chinese interests, and I think that Pakistan, one of the interesting factors about Pakistan as a mediator is, first off, Pakistan, they have muscle memory about Iran issues because they represent Iran's interests in Washington, just as the Swiss do for the Americans in Tehran. So they know how, they're familiar with the issues of Iran. But the second thing is that Pakistan is probably Iran's closest partner outside of states that are almost satellites like Burma and Laos. It's certainly the closest partner that actually has a measurable military capacity. So I think that Pakistan will be in a unique position to bring the positions of energy recipient countries like India and China to the table. And those interests are not with Iran having the ability to extort a fee. If that principle is agreed to, then there's no limit to the amount of rigmarole and the level of fees that Iran could levy. So I think that it's going to be interesting.
And talking about that, it's of course China and India, of course, had their ships, and so had Japan and France, who are allies of U.S. And it seemed that it was a desperation for, of course, we had a lot of European leaders getting in talks with Iran there. Do you think that changes anything diplomatically?
Not really. I mean, Iran has never really valued or respected the European nations and the other nations. They've engaged with them diplomatically because they were trying to define a role for them, and that role is to pressure the United States. They really didn't see any value with European countries except as possible markets, possible importers of technology like Airbus parts for Iran's civilian air fleet, which is also dual-use military. During the JCPOA, when sanctions were lifted on civil aviation parts, those airplanes were used to ferry Revolutionary Guard and Iranian officered militias into the Lebanese Civil War, for example. But basically, they only really value the Europeans because they think the Americans listen to them to some degree, and they expected the Europeans to enforce the JCPOA. They expect that the Europeans are people who will leverage the Americans to do Iranian things, and they find a community of interest because Donald Trump is not popular at all in Europe. So they think that that's fertile ground to, people like me who've spent a lot of our military career in Europe have regard for the Europeans. They figure that, well, if the Europeans tell us something that will move the American public opinion meter a little bit and possibly force President Trump to move more towards the Iranian position. But I think President Trump has demonstrated that he doesn't really care what Europeans think. He's guided by American interests as he sees them.
Also coming back to, of course, the Gulf states, because you mentioned that when you talk about Pakistan, of course, it's not just Iran, but also when you talk about their dealings with Saudi Arabia, for defense pact, almost like if Saudi Arabia gets attacked, it was known that, of course, Pakistan will get involved as well. But when you look at Iran and how their attacks happened in the Gulf states, they were able to, of course, attack power plants. They were able to access desalination plants. How does it look for the Gulf states? Of course, they would be, they're the countries who asked for security from the U.S., considering the fact that the kind of damage they have dealt with. How are they looking at these talks?
Yeah, I don't think they're sanguine about it. I'm really glad you asked me this question. So I was actually in Qatar just before the war, and I was there for the first 3 weeks of the war. And I managed to see a real shift among the Gulf states. So when the war first started, the attitude tended to be, you Americans, you caused this problem. We know how to deal with the Iranians. You stirred up a bunch of trouble. And now we're going to have to suffer with it. And it's worth noting that the Gulf states denied the U.S. access basing and overflights for military operations against Iran. So, our planes were operating from Jordan, Israel, and even the United States, Europe. It would have been much easier, much cheaper, much safer, much more firepower generated much more quickly if we had been operating from bases in the Gulf. After about 2 or 3 weeks, when it became apparent that the Iranians were attacking the Gulf states on a sustained basis, and the United Arab Emirates has taken twice as many missiles as Israel, and when it became apparent that the Iranians, as you noted, were attacking civilian infrastructure, there was a mood shift. And what they realized was, holy cow, these guys that we thought were our neighbors, they want to rule us. They want to destroy our ability to govern ourselves and put us in a position where we are permanently subordinated to them. If not, we won't be formally governed by them, but they want us to basically come to them before we make any decision on our national security. And quite frankly, that mood shift was profound. And I had a number of senior Gulf defense officials come to me and say, Donald Trump was right about Iran. We weren't. That's remarkable. So I think, honestly, what Iran has done in sustaining attacks against neutral GCC civilian infrastructure has been an incredible strategic blunder. And for them to be viewed as neighbors rather than potential conquerors by the Gulf states, it's going to take regime change in Iran, and it's going to take a generation. I mean, it's a profound, profound mistake on Iran's part.
And that's very interesting because we see U.S., at least for Israel, that was one of the goals, and somehow it almost looks impossible, of course, at this point. But of course, we'll be focusing on the talks that happen in Pakistan and see if they come out with any kind of negotiations. Of course, looking forward and positively forward for that. Thank you so much, Colonel, for joining us on the broadcast and giving your experience and your opinion on this. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor.
All right, with that, we call a wrap to World DNA for today. News and updates will follow on the other side. You're watching WION The World is One. Stay tuned.
So, I met an alien.
As Project Hail Mary continues to wreak havoc at ticket windows, we take a look at other blockbuster films inspired from books.
आज एंट्री नहीं, धमाकेदार एंट्रेंस होगा.
Meet actors Ravi Kishan and Kusha Kapila as they talk about Mamla Legal Hai Season 2. And know all about Alcatraz depiction in pop culture. All this and much more with me, Diksha Bisla, on WION in these times.
will.i.am unveils a futuristic trike. Cleopatra's World brought back to life. Apple just turned 50 in the blink of an eye. Stop doom scrolling lest life pass you by. All these stories and more coming up on this episode of Tech It Out at these times.
Get the latest updates.
Destroy their
Breaking
missiles
news.
and raise their...
Credible, clear, continuous. Experts across aisles. Diverse voices, one platform. WION World is one.
What is a classic? A motorcycle you've ridden all your life?